Shadow of the Colossus is regarded by many as one of the all-time greatest adventure games. Back in a time where open world games weren't the norm, here came a game that had a vast open world with 16 towering colossi as its only inhabitants. It's a wondrous adventure that has a lot more to it than meets the eye. If you want my full opinion on the game itself, check out my review I did over a year ago on the PS3 remaster. The new PS4 remake is largely the same game, but with vastly improved graphics. It is mind-blowing how gorgeous the game looks, and I can't recommend it enough to first-time players or long-time fans who want to relive a classic in a fresh coat of paint. In my review all that time ago, I mentioned the idea of a boss ranking, so in classic DMod fashion, here I am all this time later delivering on the promise. I considered ranking the bosses both in terms of quality and difficulty, but I believe the difficulty in Shadow of the Colossus is a questionably interesting metric. Rather than the game centering around combat prowess and taking on these towering behemoths, the battles are more like puzzles in the form of giant beasts. Once you know the trick to beating them, it's more about executing the strategy than anything else. Sure, some are more difficult to execute than others, but that has more to do with the camera than anything else. All that really matters on your end is precision in platforming and proper stamina management. We'll talk about that here and there, but the focus today is on the quality. Without further ado, I present the Shadow of the Colossus bosses ranked from worst to best.
Don't mess with the bull, young man. You'll get the horns.
Oh, if only taking your advice was an option. Seriously, you better lube up for penetration by horn before taking on CELOSIA. As with all Colossi, what you need to do to win isn't complicated in theory. That all gets thrown out the window when it comes to a foe that moves at an alarming speed compared with the rest of the Colossi. I mentioned this game is very much about precision, but your capabilities are designed around slow-moving large targets. So when it comes to this little speedster, you can quickly find yourself in a stun lock of doom. Since the Colossi are normally slow-moving, your recovery from a knockdown goes at a goddamn snail's pace. And unfortunately, CELOSIA's attack timings are exactly as long as that recovery window. The thing that frustrates me the most is the only way out of this is to mash buttons relentlessly to get up sooner, and the game never tells you that that's actually a mechanic. Even then, CELOSIA still tracks you ridiculously well and is a nuisance to dodge as a result. The actual fight consists of you getting on a pillar, knocking down a torch, going to grab the torch, and getting your ass rammed while trying to figure out how the fuck you pick it up because you've never had to pick up anything to this point in the game, and this is the 11th Colossus? Seriously, what the? Go back up, light the torch, and use it to turn the tables. Knocking the beast down, you expose his armor, and then you get to go for a rodeo ride. At this point, it's everything that's annoying about the Colossi shaking you down. You have little to no window to regain stamina, or attack for that matter, so it's really a game of trying to get off whatever attacks you can before being shaken off. Of course, they need a mechanic to defend themselves because it'd be boring if you could declare victory the moment you successfully mount them, but in the case of CELOSIA, it's balanced poorly. I'm preferential to Colossi you can, with the right timing, take a rest on their body to regain your stamina, but instead of getting a breather in between thrusting your rod deep inside them, CELOSIA wants to take a mad hump to the finish line. Overall, it's a Colossus that works against most of the mechanics set up in the game, and though you could argue that it gives variety, I argue that it leaves it sorely out of place as the worst Colossus in the game. Yeah, I hate turtles. At least this big bastard. You know what turtles aren't known for? Their remarkable speed. Imagine my joy when discovering the mystery of toppling BASARAN is waiting for this slow torp bitch to move his shell across this massive open field to these minuscule geysers. Doing this lets you see his feet and get the turtle on his back, but it takes forever. My dumbass also promptly mounted the turtle, and instead of having a good old time, I fell right through its fins back to the ground. Well, better wait for it to move back on the geyser. In reality, the design itself isn't all that bad, but other than waiting an excruciatingly long time for it to break water, it's not all that different from the second Colossi in the game. For lack of originality and making me ride aggro in circles endlessly, BASARAN brings up the near butt of the list. I hate fish. One of my biggest fears is swimming in waters that fish are lurking in. Something about the idea of being in water with creatures that I can't see but they can see me, can breathe, have an undying bloodthirst for human flesh. It's unsettling to say the least. Naturally, when a game subjects me to fighting a giant aquatic monstrosity, I'm gonna be a little less than pleased. Putting my totally not irrational fears aside, this fight suffers from something much more problematic. It's boring. With all the buildings and whatnot throughout the water, you may assume you have to bait the fish out to fight you. But no, you just need to stand in the water like bait. Terrifying, right? Maybe not, because instead of doing the sensible thing and using its leverage underwater to gobble you up, it just surfaces and lets you grab on. Yep, that's it. Wait in the water, grab on, and smack it. Eventually it takes you for a ride underwater, and then promptly repeats its mistake again and again until it's dead. There's no real reward to this fight other than the spectacle of going for a wild water ride, but for me, even that's something that I could do without. Will somebody please tell me why reskin bosses have to be a thing? I get it, development time is crunched and aspirations are often put through a wood chipper that churns out a vision that looks nothing quite like you initially imagined. But why do games consistently insist on shoehorning in filler bosses to make it appear as if the game has more content, even if it's absent of quality? Well, of course, while that run-on sentence ran is all well and good, CENOBIA actually is a superior version of CELOSIA in my mind. While the same problems as CELOSIA has are still present here, you have greater ways to combat them. There are many platforms that can keep you out of harm's way of the quick charging bull. These platforms also act as a platforming challenge for this boss, which makes it feel much more consistent with the rest of the game in comparison to the torch puzzle and rodeo. Is it very exciting to stand on top of endless pillars waiting for CENOBIA to charge them and knock them over so you can continue? No, not really, and that's why it finds itself so low on the list. But I can at least say that I enjoy this Colossus more than its earlier iteration. Hindsight is 2020, and the solution to slaying PHAEDRA is so painfully simple once you realize it that it makes it one of the most trivial colossi in the game. But that's not how my first fight went, because instead of playing checkers, I was over there trying to play 4D chess against this massive horse goat. First I tried running into the tunnels and waiting to take a quick peek and then run out and give it the old surprise motherfucker, but that didn't work. Then I tried running out of the tunnels at a right angle and never got there fast enough. Instead, just run in the tunnel and run out the other end. By the time you run up to its butt, you have more than enough time to mount it. From there, it's as simple as making your way up and smacking the head. Overly simple, yet easy to make overly complicated. Either way, it isn't terribly enjoyable compared to its peers. From here on, we're starting to break into average territory. The final Colossus is anything but average in terms of sheer scale. It's a towering beast that's trapped within stone to keep its destructive power contained. Unfortunately, that turns us into one giant, uneventful climb. Once you make it to the top, there's a few stabbing tricks to get yourself near the head and to the only weak spot. Of course, it'll shake around a bunch and even knock you off, but it's irrelevant because fall damage in this game is nearly non-existent. That and you have the grip of a god. I think MALUS could have been much more enjoyable if it was a tower with multiple weak points all the way up and challenges to meet at each of them. Instead, it feels more like a relentless slog of a stone dress that ends with more skull penetration. The next two colossi on the list have something similar in common. In fact, I'm gonna lump the two together because they share the same strengths and weaknesses. Both are quite enjoyable as bosses, but they are by far on the simpler end of the spectrum, which can make them a little bit less thrilling. This is thanks to their placement in the rotation as the first two colossi, meaning they serve more to teach you the game mechanics than actually pose a serious threat. Valus teaches you how to mount a Colossus, use its weak points to make it to greater heights, and how to ultimately take one down. QUADRATUS simply reinforces what you learned with Valus, but optionally allows for horse combat and requires the use of archery to be toppled. There isn't much else to say. These are quality fights that are trivial yet fun to experience, leaving them in the middle of the pack. Talk about confusing memory. The colossi I struggled to figure out the most was definitely PELEGIA in my recent playthrough, and that was thanks in full to remembering the trick to the puzzle in entirely the wrong way. You're meant to grab onto PELEGIA's back and use its head teeth to steer it toward a structure, jump off, hide from its lightning attacks, and force it to jump up so you can stab it in the heart that is hidden underwater otherwise. Instead, I remembered the hiding part and stood around forever waiting for it to hop up. I even saw that its back is extremely obvious about the fact that it can be climbed, and proceeded to shoot it with arrows to get his attention so I could hide even more behind the wrong spot. In concept though, PELEGIA is a pretty neat boss. It's far more puzzle than platforming challenge, which makes it a good brain teaser. With that said, it's still not quite the excitement generator that the top colossi are. The same could be said for KUROMORI. It's not the easiest colossi in the game to figure out how to combat. Like CELOSIA and CENOBIA, KUROMORI runs far more on the tiny side than the rest of his comrades. And similarly, this fight is more puzzle than platforming. Still, the puzzle isn't all that complex. Its glowing limbs are fairly noticeable, and the differing levels of the arena leave the answer pretty apparent. I didn't even know until someone told me during the stream that you can take KUROMORI down by getting right under him on the wall and shooting him in the stomach. Either way, he isn't too difficult to knock down, and the jump onto him is straightforward. Still, he's the first colossi on our list who poses a threat, offers an interesting design, and is decently fun to take down even when you know the solution. Now we're getting to the colossi that I really love, and we're starting off things with this majestic bearded big boy. Look at that thing, I mean it. You're gonna wanna look at that thing because your path to victory is by climbing up a beard. How could I not appreciate something like that? The beginning is a chase that gets your blood pumping at the thought you'd be trampled, and once you get to the end, the trick becomes a little bit easier to see. Get his attention, and thanks to his stature, he'll bow down to find you. In doing so, you get a ticket to Beard Town and can kill him very much the same as the rest of the colossi in the game. It's a simple mechanic like most of them, but the chase and appearance of this boss makes it the first of many that are truly a joy to fight. Argus to me is like the evolution of Barbas and Valus. His strategy relies on using the map to scale him rather than using his own body first and foremost, and it's as if he's a refined Valus that won't be taken down in the same easy way. The use of him to help you vault throughout the platforming of the level by baiting his attacks is brilliant, and I love the twist of the head not being the only weak spot. As you take him to nearly the end of his life, the weak point fades, and you'll need to find a way to get him to drop his sword so that you can reach his palm. And woo boy, did it take me forever to figure out how to get on that palm. Apparently it's possible to bait a fist slam out of him, but instead I took death-defying drops to get there. No matter how you seize victory, it's an undeniable thrill every step of the way. Your enjoyment of Dirge will be entirely dependent on how comfortable you are with the admittedly janky control scheme of Shadow of the Colossus. Like all the other Colossi, there's a rather simple mechanic at heart. What separates Dirge from the pack is that he requires a lot more out of the player to execute taking advantage of his weakness. To topple this foe, you'll need to ride aggro at top speed, focus your camera on Dirge, and pull out your bow to aim an arrow at his eye. This means holding triangle to keep aggro moving, holding R1 to charge up the bow, holding up L2 to keep your focus on Dirge, using the left stick to steer aggro through an arena that is circular so you can't just go straight forward depending on your location, and you need to aim at the right stick while moving at top speed to get the perfect shot on his eye. Oh, and you have to do it at least twice. There's no arguing that this fight isn't one of the most intense in the game, but you could certainly argue that its fun factor is limited greatly by the controls. For me, even though I do find managing it all to be a challenge, I still love what the fight has to offer and appreciate the complexity in its execution. A lot of the sheer awe in fighting the Colossi comes down to spectacle. At the point in the game where you reach Avion, you've toppled a few giant foes that allow for some death-defying stunts, but this is something entirely different. Baiting a massive flying creature so you can grab onto its wings and go for a ride-or-die flight is about as ballsy as can be. When the music swells and you rise in altitude, wind roaring at your back, you can only feel a sense of pure adrenaline as you move about the wings to defeat the bird. The weak points are spread out enough to make it a fun challenge, and there's nothing I could say is frustrating about the battle in the slightest. The only knock on Avion is that our final two Colossi achieve heights that are just a bit greater. That's slightly tongue-in-cheek when referencing Gaius, because while he can't fly, you do fight the swordsman on a circular arena suspended high above the sea, and he isn't exactly short in stature. Like Avion at this point in the game, you haven't fought anything too complicated, having been subjected to 2 tutorial fights with little complication. This is the first boss in the game that requires you to think a little bit. Your first instinct may be to bait the sword attack and use it to get leverage on the body. You'd be on the right track, but you'll find an arm brace blocking your path upward. To destroy it, you'll need to trick Gaius into slamming the sword down on the starting platform. This breaks the brace and allows you to use the aforementioned method to reach his weak points. Again, similarly to Avion, while none of this is overly complex, it is the first Colossi that offers any significance in terms of challenge, and the spectacle of the fight is part of what makes it so memorable. There's a reason he graces the cover of the game. He's undoubtedly one of the best fights Shadow of the Colossus has to offer. But there's one final Colossus that I consider my personal favorite. PHALANX embodies all the qualities that made the previous few Colossi great. It's a massive flying snake, and yeah, I've used the word massive a lot, but for perspective, taking this from the wiki, it's by far the largest Colossi in the game, with the width of its back reaching the size of a 4-lane highway. That's absurd! Then take into account that for it being twice the size of any other Colossi in the game, that it's one of only 2 to take flight, and whereas Avion requires you to bait him to you have to be the one to chase down PHALANX. You put all the skills you've been honing to the test. Combat with aggro, archery, platforming, stamina management, puzzle solving, and it leads to a ludicrously thrilling battle that can truly be remembered as the pinnacle of your Colossi slaying experience. Who are your favorite and least favorite Colossi? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more boss rankings and gaming content, be sure to subscribe. And check me out on Twitch to see me play these games and more live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time. We are still running the God of War Dematathon on Twitch, and I've been doing a lot of Bloodborne all bosses speedruns. I want to thank you guys for being patient with me today. My voice is very strained because I've been sick recently. And of course, thank you all for watching. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.